So then I would like to introduce Dr. Iryna Fenno and Professor Oleg Turi. Dr. Fenno is Associate Professor of the Department of Religious Studies at the Kiev National University, Head of Programs and Projects at the Kiev Center of the Ukrainian Catholic University, and guest researcher of Munich Ludwig Maximilians University. She graduated from the Faculty of Philosophy of Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev with a degree in Religious Studies and completed postgraduate studies at the Faculty of Philosophy. She defended her dissertation for the degree of Candidate of Philosophy on Religious Studies. And from 2016 to the present, she has been an Associate Professor at the Department of Religious Studies at Taras Shevchenko University of Kiev. From 15 to 16, she completed a research internship at Mainz University, and from 2022, she has been doing a research internship at Munich University. So she will make the presentation, but it will be together or in discussion with Professor Oleg Turi, who is Vice Rector for External Relations and Director of the Institute for Church History at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, and he holds a degree in history at State University of Lviv and a doctorate in philosophy history. Since 1994, he was Deputy Director and later Director of the Institute for Church History at the Lviv Theological Academy and later the Ukrainian Catholic University. His main research topics are interconfessional relations in Ukraine, ecclesiastical national identity, persecution of Christians by totalitarian regimes in the 20th century. He's an author and editor of a lot of publications and guest lecture in Lublin, Vienna, Innsbruck, Edmonton, Mainz, and Notre Dame. And we have a long cooperation also with the University of Vienna in church historical issues. So welcome here, Iryna.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dear organizers and dear participants, first of all, I would like to express a gratitude for this opportunity to be here and to share with you some ideas of the research that was made together in a cooperation with the Professor Turi. So the topic of our research is the Ukrainian Greek Catholics in the crossfire of controversy over the Vatican's position during the Russian war against Ukraine. The discussion about the Vatican's position in the context of Russian aggression against Ukraine began long before the start of the open Russian invasion. Already in February 2015, the words of Pope Francis, who called the events in Donbass as a fratricidal war, caused outrage the Ukrainian society. Given other statements of Pope Francis, particularly in encyclica Fratelli Tutti, we can infer that it considers any conflicts in the world at the fratricidal. However, in the Ukrainian context, these words were read differently. Russian propaganda has presented the proxy aggression in Donbass as a civil war, and a narrative that was intended to obscure the Russians' role in diminish the perception of it an external aggression. Thus, when the Pope's terminology aligned with the fratricidal framing, it's inadvertently accord and legitimized the Russian narrative, which Ukrainians found misrepresentative of the true nature of the events. Despite this, due to the hybrid nature of the smoldering war in Donbass, the principle of impartiality that the Vatican adheres into the case of interstate conflicts didn't arouse as much negative emotions as it did after February 24, 2022. On the contrary, shortly before Russia's open invasion of Ukraine, Both Ukrainian politicians and representatives of the Catholic Church sought to involve the Vatican as a mediator in negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. They expressed hope for the visit by the Pontiff to Ukraine, which, in the opinion of many, would draw the world's attention to Ukraine and thus prevent them. According to the Rosenkopf Center, as for 2020, Pope Francis had the highest level of trust in Ukrainian society among all Ukrainian and foreign religious leadership. The first reaction from the Vatican to the beginning of the open Russian invasion was in the spirit of the impartiality. Secretary of the State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, noted that the Pope Francis was upset by the deterioration of the situation and recalled of Pontiff's words from the day before, urging both parties to refrain from any action that could cause even more suffering to the population, destabilize the coexistence between peoples, and discredit international law. Along with this caution statement, Cardinal Parolin avoided using the words aggression or invasion, instead using the terms from the Russian propaganda dictionary referring to the Russia's special military operation on the territory of Ukraine. In his turn, Pope Francis, departing from the diplomatic protocol, visited the Russian embassy to the Holy See on the February 25th, where he expressed his concern about the event in Ukraine. In the weeks and the months that followed, the Pope rhetoric kept changing. By March the 2nd, Pope Francis called the event in Ukraine a war. On March 13th, the Pontiff used the words armed aggression for the first time, and on the March 27th, he referred to it as an invasion. However, during these more 2.5 years, the Pope Francis has largely avoided directly referencing who initiated the war. Only on a few occasions, and not into a wide audience, such as in an interview with the American Jesuit magazine America, did he explicitly state that, certainly, the one who invades is the Russian state. It is very clear. Sometimes it's a good quote, sometimes I try not to specify so as not to override and rather condemn in general. Also, it's well known whom I am condemning. It's not necessary that I put a name and surname. The end of quote. It is noteworthy that it was in an interview that Pope said that the cruelest are perhaps those who are the Russia, but are not of the Russian traditions, such as Chechens or Burats and so on. And these words spread throughout the world, prompting the Holy See to later apologize to Russia through the diplomatic channels. Numerous examples illustrated that this tightrope walk of the Pope, including the kissing of the Ukrainian flag from Bucha, and the scenario of the Stations of the Cross, and his words about the great Russia of Peter I and Catherine II, and the characterization of the Patriarch Kirill as a Putin's altar boy. This is rather a long list. There was a lot of subjectivity in all of these actions and the words. But it is important to know that Pope Francis has sometimes gone beyond and established protocols for responding to war developed by the Vatican, as no one before him has done. At the same time, in most cases, he followed the usual trajectory of the Holy See follows in the event of any international conflict, which is described by the word impartiality, or in a modern language of the Holy See, positive neutrality. Such an impartial position truly allows the Holy See to remain free in international relations and helps it to fill these relations with the values of the gospel, rather than to reinforce existing conflicts and create new ones. At the same time, it encourages people to expect a clear moral position from the Church when other participants in international relations are only following their own geopolitical or economic interests. We can assume with the certainty that in the high trust of the Ukrainians in Holy See, which was observed on the eve of the Russian invasion, was precisely the fruit of such expectations. However, the trust has fallen over the course of these 2.5 years to a level that is now less than percentage of Catholics in Ukraine. According to all Ukrainian survey conducted by the Razumkov Center Sociological Service in May 2023, the Pope Francis received just 3% of support in the rating of the trust, the head of the churches. Overall, about 44% of the Ukrainians have a negative opinions to the Pope positions on the Russian-Ukrainian war. Among them, 23 are outraged by the fact that the Pope Francis compares Ukrainians and Russians, considering them equally victims of war, and another 10% believe that the Pontiff works in favor of Kremlin. The Pope's desire to end the war in any cost is supported by 9% of respondents. Russia's aggression against Ukraine is very similar to a German invasion in Poland in 1939. Both the actions of the Nazis in World War II and the current actions of Russia raise the question of how far one can go down on the road of impartiality without contradicting our moral values. The Russian attack is not just aimed at seizing territory. It is aimed at destroying the system of human rights and the value of human dignity, which the Catholic Church considers fundamental to its social doctrine. Solidarity with the victim is clearly not enough in this situation. It doesn't actively confront and counteract the aggressor's actions, ideology, and importantly, the weaponization of religion. To effectively support the victim and uphold the justice, the more proactive stance is required. This includes unequivocally condemning the aggression, advocating for concrete actions to protect the victim, and working to uphold international law and human rights. Without such a firm and active response, the aggressor's actions might continue unchecked, leading to the further erosion of the fundamental human values and prolonged suffering for the victims. However, we would like to place this question in a more broader context. Consider how the Vatican has worked to build its relations with Ukraine and Russia since the collapse of the Soviet Union. In many cases, the way the Roman Apostolic See has interacted with Ukrainian religious communities or the state has been influenced by how these interactions could be perceived by Moscow or Moscow Patriarchate. This includes issues like the Patriarchate of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church or relations with the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Despite excellent relations with the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which granted autocephaly to the new church, the Vatican has been mindful to Moscow, overlooking one of the largest Orthodox churches. This approach culminated in a Havana meeting and the declaration. The meeting didn't achieve significant progress in ecumenical relations or contribute to resolving global conflict. Instead, the declaration discussed Ukraine while ignoring the Ukrainian perspective. As with the previous question of impartiality, Pope Francis is not its author. Here we can see a certain inertia. Also, not all preceders of the current pontiff follow this line on the same extent. This approach can be traced back to the period after the Napoleonic Wars, when the Russian Empire established itself as one of the pillars of European security and stability. And it was understood in Rome at that time. Consequently, the Vatican often turned a blind eye to how St. Petersburg treated Catholics, especially Greek Catholics, in order not to disrupt the security architecture. When in 1839 the Greek Catholics were absorbed by the Russian Orthodox Church, Rome limited its response to condemning the Uniate hierarchy rather than the Russian authorities who orchestrated these events. In more recent times, this approach was manifested in so-called Vatican Ostpolitik, which reached its height in the 1960s and 1970s. This strategy and its results were very ambiguous. It can be interpreted as the church analog of realpolitik, seen as the trial of values and the principles in the hope of achieving dubious goals, or as the art of the possible. Thanks to Ostpolitik, for example, Joseph Slippy was released from the Gulag, and the modus non mirandi was found for Catholic behind the Iron Curtain in the 60s and 70s, which later contributed to the decline of communism and the democratic transformation of the Eastern and Central Europe. Russian aggression against Ukraine has brought these questions to the forefront again. For some, the war has become further proof that Ostpolitik is inherently false, and it's exploited by those forces that see relations with the Holy See as merely one of many tools to achieve their own goals on the geopolitical chessboard. Others, like it was in the 19th century, believe that there is no alternative to dialogue at any cost with Moscow in the face of the threat of the nuclear catastrophe for the whole humanity. At the church level, Ostpolitik resulted at the beginning of an ecumenical dialogue with the Moscow Patriarchate, which often developed on the separate track from the dialogue between Rome and Constantinople and the wider Orthodox world. This special exclusive attention to the Russian Orthodox Church indicated that from Rome's perspective, that the key to restoring unity with the Eastern Orthodox churches lay in Moscow. If an agreement could be reached with the Russians, it was believed that it would be open the door to the desired unity. The Moscow Patriarchate was well aware that they held the golden share in the Rome's view and used the dialogue to achieve their own goals, particularly in Ukraine. At the same time, even the most prominent professional ecumenists in the Russian Orthodox Church emphasized that the unity with Catholics was impossible to achieve. The Russian aggression became a litmus test for the ecumenical dialogue between Rome and Moscow, revealing the extent to which it truly had ecclesiastical character and the goals, and to what extent it was instrumentalized by the Moscow Patriarchate. The involvement to the Russian Church is constructing the ideology of Ruski Mir, which became the basis for the genocidal war, provoked only some critical statements from individual representatives of the Roman Curia, such as Cardinal Kurt Koch. However, the Vatican refers from the assessing the latest Russian ideology and the role of the Church in this creation and dissemination. However, certain occasional statements by Pope Francis and those close to him, such as Father Antonio Spadaro, suggest that the Vatican has not fully understood what had happened in the Russian Church, which has been fully engaged in the propaganda of aggressive ideologies. Therefore, the current ecumenical dialogue needs to be completely rethought, as does the entire Vatican Ostpolitik. For instance, the Pope's words that the war crimes could not have been committed by the representatives of the Russian tradition, or the attempt to distinguish between the great Russia culture and the Russia's current actions, indicate the belief that there is still a chance to return to a previous state of affairs overlooking this unpleasant episode of the war against Ukraine. The same procedure should be applied to Russian religious culture and the Russian church. Just as it's important to examine Russian culture thought as a decolonial lens, it's equally crucial to scrutinize the Russian religious tradition. At the same time, this tradition should not serve as an indulgence for the contemporary Russian Orthodox. For the further healthy development of ecumenical dialogue, it is a part of the moral duty to assess the Russian Church's role in shaping and propagating the ideology of Ruski Mir and the ideology itself. The Russian Church, close alignment with the state, has led to its involvement in promoting nationalist and expansionist ideologies that have justified acts of aggression. This complicity needs to be critically examined rather than obscured by the nostalgic or romanticized view of Russian religious tradition. Unfortunately, in the face of such gross instrumentalization of religion, the Vatican has not chosen to act as a prophetic voice for the moral assessment regarding the Russian churches, and its role in the war. Instead, it continues to rely on diplomatic means to maintain relations with the Moscow Patriarch. This approach does more harm than good, undermining the credibility of Christian preaching, especially in Ukraine. By prioritizing diplomatic engagement over the principal stance, the Vatican risks compromising its moral authority and failing to address the profound issues as an intersection of religion and geopolitics. Returning to the example of the World War II, it is often argued that the Pope Pius XII's cautious stance on Nazis' actions was due to fear and the strong condemnation would provoke or could have provoked further erosions, including against Catholics. And this is indeed plausible. Some analysts have expressed concern that the more assertive papal position against Russian aggression could have led to the complete eradication of the Catholic presence in Russia. We have no doubt that the Russian government is capable of such things. Realizing all of these difficulties of the current situation of Russian Catholics, it should be acknowledged that they bear some degree of responsibility for their country's actions as any other Russian citizens. If the Vatican is genuinely concerned about their plight, it should address the issue of religious freedom in Russia publicly, something that has never been done. This issue has always been shrouded by the secrecy of diplomatic agreements. Instead, the situation of Ukrainian Greek Catholics is a serious concern. Their communities exist in Russia, but they do not have the official status. However, even publicly, there is no information about their activities, and their fate is unknown. Instead, we know for sure that in the occupied territories of Ukraine, Greek Catholics are subjected to systematic persecution and even bans. For instance, the occupation authorities of the Zaporizhia region completely banned the activities of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, Caritas, and the kinds of Columbus in these occupied territories. According to his Beatitude Sviatoslav, the quote, "In the occupied territories today, there is no virtually Catholic priest, either Greek Catholic or Roman Catholic. And at the same time, at those territories where Russia is coming, Stalinist time or returning, and the clergy are being repressed." The end of quotation. Even in Ukraine, Greek Catholics have found themselves in a situation of crossfire at the different levels, and we want to talk about this separately, having identified several levels. And the first level, it's in relation with the Orthodox. The issue of union in the role of Greek Catholics in the religious life in Ukraine is presented by the clergy of the Russian Orthodox Church in a way that promotes pro-Russian narratives and ideologically colored rhetoric. Here, a few examples from the speeches and the statements by the Russian Orthodox Church officials, and these messages have appeared over the last 4 years and are available on the official website of the Moscow Patriarch. The first example, Metropolitan Hilarion Alfeev, who was during 2009 and 2022 the titular Metropolitan of Volokhansk and the chairman of the Department of External Church Relations of the Moscow Patriarchate. In his speech promoting the multiplication of godness and God-given truth, in October 2021 declared, a quotation, At the same time, the Russian Orthodox Church faced serious problems in the religious sphere. At the end of 20th century was the time of the revival of Unia in Ukraine, with the support of local authorities. The unions seized churches of Moscow Patriarchate, murdered priests, abused Orthodox believers, and launched a peace campaign to discredit Orthodox Christians in the media. And later he pointed out, for Metropolitan Kirill, a chairman of the Department for External Church Relations at the time, the problem of Unia was one of the key issues in the 1990s and the early 2000s. This issue was in the center of the agenda relations between Russian Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. As a result of the department's effort, the whole of Orthodox Catholic dialogue turned to issue of Unia, which in time led to the official recognition by the Catholic side as a fallacy of the methodology of uniatism and proselytism in the relations of Orthodox churches. Also, the second example from this Metropolitan Hilarion, but it was mentioned on March 2022, and it was the conference in St. Petersburg Theological Academy. And the contribution of His Holiness Patriarch Kirill to the strengthening of the inter-Orthodox unity against the background of the invasion of Ukraine by the Patriarchate of Constantinople. This is the topic of his report. And we would like to draw your attention to the fact that at that time, the full-scale invasion by the Russian Federation had already begun, and how symbolic it was that the hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church writes about the invasion of Ukraine by the Patriarchate of Constantinople. Describing the process of the preparation by the church and political circles and the actual granting the autocephaly to Ukraine, the Patriarchate of the Constantinople and the Metropolitan see the special role of the unions in this. And he stated in these documents, His Holiness Patriarch Kirill, immediately after the publication of the state communique, sent fraternal messages to the primates of all local Orthodox churches, in which he noted that the initiative to grant autocephaly didn't come from the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the majority church in Ukraine, but from the schismatics, local schismatics, committed politicians, as well as unions, who see autocephaly as the first step towards uniting Orthodox with the Greek Catholic under the Homophorion, the Roman Pope. And one more fresh example. In October 2024, it was a conference in Belgrade University, and the Metropolitan Luka of Zaporizhia and Melitopol make a report, Ukraine as a testing ground for a new union, threats and ways to overcome. Presenting the creation of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine as a result of the non-canonical intervention by Patriarch Bartolomei of Constantinople and his synod of the Ukrainian church crisis, the cleric present as a part of the larger project aimed to unify the Christian world under the auspices of the Vatican with the participation of the family. In this context, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine project functions as the experimental platform for development methods and practices for destroying the establishment order in the relations between local Orthodox churches and distorting ecumenical dialogues. Also, analyzing the historical context of the religious life in Ukraine, he points out, the quotation, already in 2003, World Orthodoxy, through the demands of the primate of the all local Orthodox Church, expressed the position of solidarity with the Unia and the attempts to establish a Uniate Patriarchate in Ukraine. This response was given in a memorandum addressed by the Cardinal Walter Kasper to His Holiness Patriarch Alexis II of Moscow and all Russia on behalf of the Apostolic See. Following Patriarch Alexis' memorandum, the heads of the local churches sent their responses, including Patriarch Bartolomeo of Constantinople, who sent a special message to the Pope. In these messages, the Unia was described as an ecclesiological heresy, which has no right to exist in Christianity, and the creation of the Ukrainian Uniate Patriarchate was described as an extreme, hostile, and unfriendly step towards Orthodoxy. And the Havana Declaration only reinforced these words. Thus, during the war, the Russian Orthodox Church significantly intensified its rhetoric against both Orthodox Church of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Appealing to the speeches also constantly refer to the ecumenical tension and interreligious controversies, which have been particularly aggraved by the Ukrainian issue, which appeals to the intervention of the Patriarch of Constantinople in the support of the Vatican. And the second level is internal level in relation with the Roman Catholic Church. Various statesmen by the Pope have caused in the great stir, perhaps most notably when he spoke of Duginas as an innocent victim of war, and when he interviewed with the Swiss broadcaster, and the Pope spoke of need for negotiation in Russia's war against Ukraine, and the stronger will be the one who has courage to raise a white flag. Or when enthusiastically instructed by the youth of Russia to preserve their heritage and so on. At the same time, Putin's spokesman repeatedly used such statements by Pope to justify his pro-Russian position. For example, the fact that the Putin, like a Pope, believed that the negotiations are the best way forward. It was a Peskov statement on the March 2024 quotation. As far as I understand, there was a wider context of what the Pope said. But in general, of course, you can understand that he was saying he was in favor of negotiation. You know that the Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly spoken about readiness and openness to solve our problems through negotiations, and that it is preferred way. The spokesman continued. You know that unfortunately both the Pope's statement and the repeated statement of other parties, including ours, have recently been met with an absolutely rigid rejection by the Kiev regime. They do not allow for the possibility of any negotiations. The end of quotation. It is worth noting, however, that Catholics and the Greek Catholics in Ukraine have also reacted to such statement. For example, in an interview, the head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church states, quotation, "We are well aware that Ukraine doesn't understand the Pope when it comes to us, our war, our pain, our suffering. But there are many similar crises of communication in other areas. Perhaps without realizing it, the Pope and the Vatican have found themselves on the front line by the hybrid war with Russia, for which they are not fully prepared." And another example, Miroslav Marinovich, who clearly stated that the Ukrainian Greek Catholics are experiencing this situation with difficulty. Some of them simply do not understand what is happening in the Vatican, while others are convinced that we are dealing with the influence of the Russian special service. And the quotation, of course, I have no proof of Russian agents, but I can clearly state that both the Holy Father personally and the Vatican Courier as a whole should seriously reconsider all aspects of their Moscow obsession, which indicate the great and the still untreated interior of the Ostpolitik, says Marinot. And to summarize, despite all efforts of ecumenical dialogue and the signed declaration in Palamanda and Havana, which recognize the right of Greek Catholics to exist, the reality of Russian aggression against Ukraine shows that neither Moscow, state, and the Church recognizes this right in practice, and at every opportunity tries to finally solve the problem of the uniatism in the usual way by eliminating it. Nor the Vatican is particularly concerned with protecting these rights, practically not